Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us, everyone. This is the Personal Statements Workshop. Just to let you know, this is being recorded. It will be uploaded to our website at the link that I dropped in the chat box. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Erin, our Director of Pre-Professional Advising.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. We're so grateful for all of you who are here today, both students and our representatives from different offices who are here to share. We have several different types of experts here to talk to you today on the personal statement experience for applying to medical and dental schools. I'll ask to do some quick introductions, and then we will have Beth Sedgey from the Center for Career Development take away our first part of our session. Our second part of our session will be with representatives from the UConn School of Medicine, or UConn Health, as well as from the University of New England College of Medicine. So Beth, if you don't mind introducing yourself, and then we'll kind of go around the room with Chris, Christina, and Granville, and Keith.
Sounds good. Thanks, Erin. So I'm Beth Sedgey. I'm one of the associate directors at the Career Center. I have two areas of focus: college to career transition and experiential learning. So this personal statement stuff fits right in, and my pronouns are she, her, hers.
Chris, if you don't mind going next.
Sure. My name is Christopher Tripp. I'm the Assistant Director of Operations for the Office of Graduate Admissions here at the University of New England. We work directly with the College of Osteopathic Medicine in their admissions process. And Christina will talk about UNICOM a little more.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Chris. My name is Christina Arecci. I am the Senior Coordinator of Recruitment for the University of New England College of Osteopathic Medicine. We're happy to be here. I think some of the attendees might have attended a couple of our spring virtual sessions, kind of talking through the admissions and recruitment process. We've had a couple of great student-led panels this year and kind of discussing more of the osteopathic medicine field. So we're happy to talk about personal statements, and also towards the end, if there are any questions towards the recruitment side, I'm here for those as well.
Great, thank you. Granville, welcome.
Hi, everyone. I'm Granville Ransford. I'm here in the Department of Health Careers Opportunity Program at UConn Health. So we run a lot of programs for students interested in health careers. But in addition to that, I serve on the admissions committee, both of the medical school and the dental school here. So I've read a lot of personal statements. And also I serve as a pre-med, pre-health advisor for about 27 years now. So glad to be here.
Thank you so much. We are excited to hear and learn from your expertise. And Dr. Sanford, would you mind introducing yourself?
So hello, welcome everybody. I've was at the medical school for many years in capacities and admissions and student affairs, and now with the undergraduate campus doing some advising. Great pleasure to work with all of you, get involved in teaching some classes as well. So welcome, and happy to share whatever experience I have.
Awesome, thank you. Just a reminder for everybody, if you can keep yourself muted during the presentation, we will invite any questions as they come along. Please share those in the chat, and Krista and I will make sure they're addressed at the right time. And when we get to the end of each section and the end of the presentation, if time permits, we'll allow you to go ahead and unmute and ask any questions directly. And I think Christina is willing to stay around for any questions specific to the University of New England's osteopathic program. So with that, we'll go ahead and ask Beth, please take it away.
All right, thanks again. So I'm going to share my screen. So I just need someone to acknowledge that you're seeing it. So Erin, okay, good, thank you. All righty, so I'm going to talk to you today about personal statements, and I'm hoping that many of you are here because you're excited about the prospect of writing a personal statement, because it means that you're looking forward to your future. Right? This is your chance to sell yourself and to really make this incredible first impression, while also not raising anxiety and feeling all this pressure. Because I know as I said that, like, oh my gosh, what am I trying to tell people? So really a personal statement truly, along with your entire application package, is a chance for you to show off your best self. And you get to create the tone and the messaging that's being sent. No one is doing it talking about you. You are talking about yourself, which even though a lot of people don't like to do, I still think is better, because you are in charge of the narrative. It's not like someone else is creating it for you. So we'll go over a little bit. I'm going to show you some resources that are online really briefly, and then we'll go into a little bit more depth about the personal statement, as well as the process of writing it, and then what happens next. And as Erin said, if anyone has questions at any time, throw them in the chat. The way my system is set up, it's hard for me to see the chat, but I can see you, Erin. So if you kind of just give me a hands up as a pause, I'll know that you have a question that needs to come up, because unfortunately I can't see Krista, just you. Okay, so Career Center resources. There are a number of online resources for you. If you go to our website, the Career Center website, and hopefully this will work, that you'll be able to see it still. That it switched now, you can see. Excellent. Okay, so you will see there's a number of tiles that talk about factors to consider when exploring graduate school. We'll click on this view more resources, and then you will see a whole bunch of information. The one I wanted to point out specifically at the moment is, where'd it go? Personal statements. Oh my gosh, I looked right past it. Anyway, when you read more, you're going to come up with some sample ones that we have written. So please do not plagiarize. They're there to use as guides and ideas, but not for you to copy verbatim or even try to copy a writing style, because that never works anyway. And then the first link, though, is our handout. Now, this is a very text-heavy handout, and I am going to revise it over the summer. Much of what I'll be saying today is also replicated in this handout, so don't worry if you miss something. Just go back and look at the handout, and you'll see some great detail. But it is 2 pages long. So that is one thing I wanted to show you. Okay, so let me click this, and it should hopefully bring me back to my PowerPoint. Yay. Then we have more information here on personal statements, and then just dropping down here, the career coaching. Oh, I don't know why that keeps happening. The career coaching staff, you can make an appointment with any of us using Handshake, not Nexus. Use Handshake to make an appointment, meet with someone like myself who will happily meet with you to review your personal statements, as many drafts as you have. There's no limit on how often you can meet with us. And in addition, there's the Pre-Med Dental website page with good information about the applications. Erin, do you want me to click on that for students?
No, they can just know that toward the bottom of our primary application page, there's some details about personal statements.
Excellent. Okay. So let's talk about the statement itself. So the purpose of your statement, as I mentioned earlier, it's your narrative, and it can serve a number of purposes. A big one, though, is let's look at how well you write. Are you articulate? I'm like, I don't know why this is on an automatic slideshow, so that will keep happening because it'll be too awkward to try to fix that. So just bear with me. So we want to know, even though as a doctor, right, you'll be talking a lot, you also have to write a lot. So we want to make sure that you are articulate in that space. So this statement will allow you to showcase your ability to write, to explain information in a clear, cohesive manner. It will also be able to give you a chance to show off how well you represent yourself, as I've mentioned. It's your chance to indicate those strengths of yours and truly to say, well, you are a good member of the healthcare profession. That's really key. You want to show why healthcare, why you're going to be a good fit. So when you start looking at the content, and I'm going to try real hard not to just read directly off the slide for you. I can't tell you though how many times I've read personal statements and the person has not actually followed the directions or answered the question that was posed. So right off the bat, we want to make sure that you are absolutely following those directions. Now, what we want to do is make sure that your response is truly cohesive, that it is on topic, that you are focused, that you're not rambling. Sometimes when I talk, I can ramble and I hear myself and I bring myself back. And sometimes I do that in my writing too, and I don't always see it. So I need someone from the outside to come in and take a look and just let me know you actually did kind of ramble a bit. Make sure you speak to what makes you this special, unique, distinctive applicant. And I'm sure folks from the med programs can verify this. I've read many a few for people going into physical therapy or dermatology or plastic surgery, and they talk about how they had a situation when they were in their youth or a situation that happened to a family or a friend where it was so impactful, it just changed the trajectory of their path. And it was significant. My understanding is from a number of people in the field, they don't want to read about how this one life-altering event affected you and led to your career path. I think you can mention it, but don't make it the whole purpose of the statement, because so many other students are also writing the same thing, and that doesn't make you unique and distinctive, and that is incredibly important. So maybe you talk about how did you change as a result of? How have you acted as a result of? Did you go on and join a number of organizations and go on trips where you could start doing, how did it open the door for you? And then what did you do once that door is open? So we want to hear less about the moment and more about what you're doing now. Use language that makes sense, that's easy to understand, and please don't feel that you need to re-educate your readers. Sometimes I've read personal statements where someone will cite a journal article that a doctor had written, and they know that person from that med school is going to read the prompt. It's like, no, you don't need to restate the study that was done, right? So make sure just you're using language and correctly, and you think about who your audience is. If you are not genuine and sincere, it will come across. So my initials kind of speak to that. Make sure that you are truthful and you're not trying to tell a story that isn't really true, isn't really effective. We also don't want you to repeat your resume. They're going to get your transcript or resume. If you have a story about an experience and you want to expand on it, absolutely. But please do not just reiterate words that are already there. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next slide now. And in addition, sometimes though, there is no prompt, there is no question. So we want to make sure that you speak to these points. You want to really speak to the reason you're pursuing this field. Why are you going into the health field? Why do you want to pursue medicine or dentistry? We want to make sure that, again, your reasons don't sound shallow. So you truly think about if you are at a social gathering and you are explaining to someone about it, and then go a little deeper. Maybe that's how you translate it to the written document. We want to make sure that you are able to speak to, if there's an area of study that you want to specialize in, you can bring that up now. We know you might change your mind, but it's absolutely okay to show that you've been thinking about a certain area of specialty. You also can address where have been your successes and what obstacles you've had to overcome. And I would try to make them related to the field of medicine. I wouldn't talk about maybe an obstacle overcoming, like, that a goal of yours was to climb a mountain and it took 10 years because the weather always got in the way. Yeah, that's not an obstacle to overcome, right? So we want to make sure it's relevant to this situation. When you talk about your past and your present and your future, again, keep it in that relationship to the world of medicine and healthcare versus talking about a side goal or a side gig. That just doesn't fit in this situation. Now, when you talk about your preparation, again, we want to make sure as much as relevant. You may talk about a certain class that you had that was not directly related because the skills you gained from that experience you can apply to the future situation. That's okay. I just don't want you going off on random tangents. Okay. So let's talk a bit about the prompts specifically that you will get for allopathic medicine. So you're going to use very specifically this personal comments essay. It's a chance for you to distinguish yourself, as we've talked about before, from other candidates. So when you reference it, you want to make sure that you are writing it in a way that is, again, back to the same points before, clear, articulate, answering the question. Many admission committees place significant weight on that essay. So you want to ask yourself very specifically, why you selected this field of medicine versus other fields. What drew you to it? What are you hoping to gain by being in it? How do you hope to contribute as a graduate of the program? What's motivating you to learn more about medicine? Allopathic medicine is a one type of medicine, so you really want to speak to that you understand this type of medicine. And then is there something you want medical schools to know that has not been disclosed in any other part of your application? This would be a good opportunity to do that as well. In addition, you could also include information about were there circumstances that maybe prevented you from being successful in a certain situation, obstacles that you have faced, again, not doing the hiking obstacle, but other obstacles that really impact your application, etc., that you think would be beneficial for the committee to know about you and only add to your candidacy. So sometimes when we think about personal statements, I've read some from students and they just want to tell everything. They just feel they need to purge. And I think for a first draft, that's great. For the final draft, probably less so. Always go back to who your audience is. Are you sharing information that is going to help you and help the committee decide that you are a good candidate for the program? Sometimes people write stuff because they want to get it off their chest, but at the end of the day, it really isn't relevant enough for the admissions committee. So just keep track on that. And as the last note says, if there's fluctuations in your record that are not explained elsewhere, again, this is a great chance for you to explain situations. We don't want people to go into your application and leave with too many questions, unknowns. We want them to leave with saying, I want to meet this person. I'm curious, right? I want to know more, but not to the point where I want to know more because I don't know enough. It's I want to know more because I'm really intrigued. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. So for the DO and osteopathic medicine, it's going to be a little bit different. Some similarities, right, but a little bit different. You're going to, again, write your statement. It will be shared with all of your medicine schools, so you won't be able to personalize it right here. And that's key. Once you submit it, you cannot go back and edit it. So that's a very important point to note, to make sure, again, doing your drafts, and then make sure you label it final so you don't accidentally submit the wrong one or anything like that. That's just undue stress, right? As it says, keep though your topic more general for this one because it is sent to so many programs. So if you're only looking at, so let me backtrack here for a minute. When I was job searching, which I know is not personal statements, when I was job searching and I went to an extremely small private college and then to a large research one public university. So when I applied for jobs, if I applied to a UConn, I would speak to my experience at the public university. And if I applied to Quinnipiac, I spoke to my experience as attending a private college. That would not work for this, right? So you need to make sure you're actually speaking broadly. That said, if all of the programs you're applying to have a commonality, they all are urban, right? Let's say they're all in the Northeast. Of course, then you can speak to that part. But in general, be more general so that way you're not accidentally saying the wrong, throwing the name of a school in, or citing an example of a program, a key thing that a program does when it turns out not all the programs do that. I remember talking to a student who was looking at a program, this was a couple of years ago, and they were looking about how they work for cadavers. And one school had it, this is pre-pandemic, it was all 3D virtual, and another school was the actual cadaver in front of them. I almost said live. That's the wrong word. Anyway, so when I was working with the student, they did write 2 different essays and how each one had its benefits. But this would be an example. If you're applying to programs with multiple different types and styles, we want to make sure you're not actually, citing something inappropriately. Make sure it didn't jump too far ahead. Yep, it did. Okay. Okay, so now let's talk about format and grammar. As I said earlier, you want to make sure that you answer the questions. At the top, you can see there are specific instructions with the character length, and notice how they're all slightly different, but at least they all include spaces. Thank goodness. So you know ahead of time though, and use that counting function. I definitely encourage a broad to narrow approach, which I'll cover in the next slide. Make sure that your sentences are well developed. You don't have fragments. You know how to use a semicolon, for example, versus the em dash versus a comma. And that's where the writing center comes in. I'm a little bit of a word nerd, so I do check that stuff when I work with students, but I can't speak for all of my career coach colleagues that are also into editing. And that's not an expectation from the Career Center, but the Writing Center definitely can help you with that. We also want to make sure that you vary your cadence, just like with me talking. Sometimes I talk fast, sometimes slow, I'm excited. With your writing, you want to get that across. Don't have all short sentences, don't have all long sentences. And again, catch those errors. And we'll talk more about how to do that. When you are writing your personal statement, I'd like you to think of it very broadly and getting narrow and then going back out. So the first part, why medical and dental health professions? So that's going to be really broad, and then narrow down why this specific field of study, why the narrow, and then why the specific school and program. This is if you can speak to specific schools. If you can't, obviously, you might leave out why the school and program and just talk about programs in general. Then you go broader again, right? And a lot of people stop at ABC, and that hurts them. So I want you to go to that D and E. How will you contribute to the field of healthcare as a student, as a graduate? How will you represent your medical field? And how will you potentially have an impact in the profession? Now we know no school is going to hold you to this and say, you said you had a 7-year plan and at X mark, this is going to happen. Instead, it's to show that you've been thinking in a long-term way, that this is just not a random decision. You didn't wake up one day and say, I think I'm going to go to med school and I'm going to do all these hoops and stuff just because, I think I should go to med school because everyone in my life has always told me I should go to med school. No, we want to see that sincerity and coming through and that you're thinking about it in the longer term and, what gets you excited about the profession. it is extremely common to have multiple drafts. So, and sometimes around draft 3, 4, or 5, people either literally or figuratively crumple it up and throw it away and start over. So if that happens to you, do not stress out about it. It's, again, really common. Another point, if you're working on it and you are hitting the proverbial brick wall, you have the white page in front of you and you just have writer's block, then put it down, go for that hike, get that fresh air, clear your head, and then come back a little bit later. It's not effective to just stare at the screen and try to type or write. You won't be able to get your creative juices going, and you'll honestly, it's an act of frustration and futility. It does help to start early. Sometimes I meet students who are applying, let's say, I honestly don't remember the exact timeline for med schools, but I'll meet a student who's applying, let's say, in March for a program. They'll come in and start to see us in November, honestly, many months early, because they don't want that stress of, oh my gosh, I only have 2 weeks to write this. And I know the med school application is fairly comprehensive and it has many aspects. So starting early is never a bad thing with this process. Getting it proofed. Highly encourage you to have it get proofed. Now, proof it yourself, but also ask others. There's different people you can ask. So whether it's faculty and staff at UConn or other people that you know in your personal and professional network, it's all appropriate. At some point, you are going to decide, I've had enough of asking for feedback and enough other people's opinions, and I need to decide the way I want to write this for me. Again, this is your essay. It has to be your tone, your language. When you get to that point, and I still want you to ask for one more time for feedback for typos and grammar and punctuation. And when you find that trusted person or people to ask for that, you are going to say to them, I am really happy with my content. Unless you see something so glaring or stupid, please don't talk to me about my content. I am looking for feedback on, do I have extra periods? Do I have inappropriate use of semicolons, etc.? When you give people a way to read the document, that's what they will read it for. I get so frustrated when I ask people to read stuff from me, or students have told me this themselves when they come in and they'll ask someone to read stuff and the person comes back and say, yeah, it was great. I thought it was fine. I think you have a good product. I know as much as I'd like to hear that someone might like my writing, if I'm asking for feedback, I need specifics. So tell me what you want me to look for, and that's what I will look for. And that way you won't do that broad scope. They'll actually give you some details. Okay, some next steps. So you're going to get some writing, get your ideas down on paper. You're going to research your program pretty thoroughly. You're going to research your field. You know why you're pursuing this type of medicine that you're pursuing. You can always reach out to alumni for ideas. You can go in Husky Mentor Network. You can work with the pre-advising office. There are ways to find alumni. Remember, for the most part, one statement does not always cover all. Sometimes for med school it could, but again, you want to read those fine line and just make sure you're answering appropriately. You can, this is definitely helpful. If you're asking someone to write you a letter of recommendation, absolutely feel free to share your personal statement with them, even when it's in draft form. I know anytime I write a letter of recommendation, I like having the resume as well as the personal statement because it gives me that context. And I want to make sure that if I'm speaking to someone's ability to do to take on a certain task, or there's something in a program that might appeal to them, that I'm consistent with what they're writing in their personal statement. I don't want to say that someone loves group work if they're applying to an online program where they're only going to be working, autonomously for 4 years. That would be a very bad disconnect. And then remember, once you've submitted it, you're done, right? Once you submit your application, it's out of your hands. Mentally, you have to let that go and just move on. And I've met students who get stuck thinking, and they do the what ifs, and what ifs just don't help. You've applied, you move on. Handshake, again, is where you can look to make appointments with us, as well as see when there's grad fairs, where there's other med schools might be recruiting. So you definitely can look in Handshake. The Husky Mentor Network I mentioned earlier, this is an excellent way to meet with professionals who have completed their degrees, who are in process. You might find other students, other alumni who studied what you studied, and you want to talk to them about that as well. So Husky Mentor Network is just an excellent way to connect with alumni from UConn, and as well as some other professionals who are, friends of the university. Information about us, I'd only given the store's information on the left. The hours for all of our campuses are pretty much 8 to 5. For everyone, you would schedule through Handshake, and we are meeting virtually through WebEx and Teams and Google and all sorts of any way that works well. So right now appointments are still virtual, but we're happy to meet with students from all campuses. We have career coaches at all of our campuses, and it goes from there. And our last slide is now leading into our med school admissions team. So I'm going to turn this off just because it keeps floating and I don't know why, but feel free. I'm happy to answer questions as well as please stay at the end if people want to talk to me privately. Stop sharing. So there we go.
Thank you so much, Beth. I really appreciate your expertise from the career side in terms of what makes personal statements successful broadly. And we do have students who are applying to a variety of different programs or might be considering a growth year where maybe they do a master's level program or something like that. So I think it's great to hear your perspective from and your expertise from a broader view. I think right now we're going to go ahead and turn to our admissions representatives and experts. But please, if you do have questions, do send them in the chat or go ahead and raise your hand and we'll address those as we have time. We'll start with by presenting a question to both Granville and Chris, and then we'll allow them to kind of jump in and share any of their expertise. I'm guessing both of them have read thousands of personal statements in their lives. So now is a chance for you to kind of get the secrets to what could make you successful. So I think we'll start with Chris and then feel free to jump in after Granville. What do you and your admissions committees look for in a strong personal statement?
Well, I think a lot of this stuff was definitely touched upon already, but like we want a clearly written, concise personal statement that is free of errors. It reads well. It tells us exactly what you're trying to tell us, right? There's a format to writing these things that is not, you're not writing a novel, right? It's a very concise format to get your thoughts across. And so ensuring that what you're trying to tell us can come across in that short frame is really important. Trying to tell us something that is going to take 3 or 4 pages in the 50, 200 words, whatever it is, like that's not going to work out. So again, knowing what you're trying to say and how you say it is really important. Being concise is really important. I think one of the biggest things that our committee looks for is sort of that reflectivity of like how you're reflecting on the experiences that you have, right? You can talk about what you've done all day, but if you don't know how to reflect upon those and dig a bit deeper and get into some of the more the things that are not as easily touched upon on the surface or just by looking at your application, that's really important. So that the depth, right? One thing that sort of comes to mind with the DO stuff is people often say, oh, I want to come to a DO school and I'm really interested in holistic medicine, right? And yeah, you're scratching the surface of it. You're using some buzzwords, but if you can go a bit deeper about how you're connected into that, why your philosophy on medicine and life fits with the philosophy of a DO program, that's the type of depth that we're looking for, the type of reflectivity in your essay. And then obviously having no mistakes is like one of the biggest things, right? As soon as we see a mistake in an essay, like that's a pretty big red flag because you've had an incredible amount of time to prepare this for submission. It's not like we're asking you to write it on the fly and those few mistakes are going to be forgiven. You really need to pay very close attention to what you're doing. So I think those are some like key areas. I think the subject piece is really hard because so many people write that very basic, I've wanted to be a doctor since. And when you see that again and again, it gets incredibly boring. And so having a way to go beyond that a little bit and really looking at a different way to share some of that information that is not as, I guess, cliche now would be really, really good. Because again, that's something that we're reading. And if you can stick out with your essay, that's very helpful.
This is easy for me. All I have to say is ditto. No, seriously. some of the things that this Chris mentioned, that's exactly what we're looking for. We're looking for what I consider to be a strong personal statement is something that you can follow. It flows. So you not only do you mention the experiences that that influence you, but you also have to talk about, as Chris mentioned, the reflective part. How did that impact your decision? Did that impact your life? How does that impact how you foresee yourself, in becoming a practicing physician? So all those things that we're looking for. I tell students all the time that, you don't have to be, we are not looking for someone who is, a poet laureate or something, but we want a document that we can follow. Obviously, free of errors, et cetera, all those things, yes, but we want to have a document that we can actually follow. So it flows. And so there's some progression in terms of when you're writing, that statement. And again, not just summarizing everything that's on your application. We don't want that at all. I mean, sometimes I've seen very strong personal statement. They probably only mention one or two things that were actually in the application, but it was very strong because they take care of the reflective part of it and demonstrate to us what type of individual, that they are. All right.
Great. Thank you so much to both of you. One of the things that we're constantly stressing in our office is, really paying attention to the path you are following. Like Chris said, if you're applying to an osteopathic school, not being afraid to dig a little deeper into how your philosophy aligns with the philosophy of that type of school as well. One of the things that kind of both of you touched on is the need, is how things kind of get repeated, or people say the same things like, I've always wanted to do this since I was a child. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the types of experiences or topics that tend to get overused, and maybe some of the things that students should avoid writing about if possible in their essays. And so I think we'll start with that, and then we can kind of dig into some of the particulars of the right now, like should we write about COVID? But maybe Granville, would you talk a little bit about things that you see a little too often that maybe take some extra work if they're really going to be done well?
Yes, what I've seen a lot is that, I was living with my grandparents and, she was sick and I helped to take care of her, whether it's changing bandages or something like that or doing. So I've seen a lot of that, and that can become very, very boring. Now, that doesn't mean that, if that's your situation, you can write about it, but you just have to understand that we're seeing a lot of that. So you have to make sure that it's something that that really stands out. And again, the reflective part is very, very important. So it's not enough to tell us, yes, my grandmother was sick and I looked after her. And because I was involved in her care, I decided I want to be a physician. So you have to go much deeper than that so that you can stand out. Okay. Again, I want to make it clear. It doesn't mean that you cannot, talk about, if you're actually taking care of your sick family member. Okay. That is very important, but you have to make sure that you dig deeper than just saying, I took care of a sick family member. All right. And you mentioned about the COVID-19, and certainly, yes. Yes, you can talk about COVID-19 and the impact that this has on you. I mean, one of the things, I can see in a personal statement is that, as a matter of fact, I was advising a student yesterday, and they were talking about the health disparities. And this student happened to be in a community that was severely devastated by the COVID-19. And actually, one of the results of that was because of the stark health disparities in that community. So I'm saying, sure, that's a wonderful thing to talk about in a personal statement in terms of the impact that it has had on you, and in terms of how you see yourself as a practicing physician. All right. So don't run away from the COVID-19. I suspect that we'll be seeing a lot of personal statements that mention that, and that's fine. All right. But again, the reflective part is very, very important. Okay. Chris?
Yeah, all of that is very true. I think, both of the pieces that we talked about, I know I wanted to be a doctor since, and a lot of the family stuff is so common. It's what we probably see the most of. With that said, it can be done well. I think the family experiences piece is the one that sort of sticks out as a way that you can do it well, instead of writing about it in a generalized way of I took care of my grandparents and they, you know, these experiences over time helped me realize I wanted to be a physician. It's often more helpful to narrow it down and write about a specific circumstance or scenario that you can, again, be reflective on about that longer term period, right? Again, specifics are really important. Getting down into some of the weeds is really important. So I think those are probably the two like biggest overused topics that I've seen over the years. It's one of the most common things that we see in terms of statements, but if you can, again, pull back and really look at who your audience is, what your ultimate goal is in writing this statement. Are you trying to tell us a story? Are you trying to get something across to us? There's different ways of writing this, right? You can do it in a more creative way. You can do it in a less creative, more essay way. So part of it is about finding your voice in that and then using that to tell your pieces. So I think, again, going back to the COVID piece that you had mentioned, we've seen a lot of stuff about COVID this year, obviously. There was a question added to the AACOMAS application specifically about how COVID impacted people. One of the things that I did note this year, it was always, for the most part, people talking about the negatives, right? This happened and I couldn't do this, or this happened and I was no longer able to follow through with this or this or this. And I think moving forward, it would be much more helpful if you flipped that and said, okay, this happened and here's what I was able to do, right? Here's how I was able to move through this and find some alternative ways, creative ways to still reach toward my goal. Because yeah, we understand it's harder to shadow now. We understand it's harder to get out and get different types of medical exposure, but there are still students doing it, and there are still students doing it in very creative ways. And so I think for that question, it highly depends on what they're writing about and how they're approaching what they're writing about in terms of COVID. But we also want to know how it impacted them. So I will say the one thing that I wanted to mention about some of this that is a common thread is you don't want to repeat yourself too much on your application. We ask not only for you to write a personal statement, we have some supplemental essays that are part of the application. So it gets tricky when your essay that you've written and then your the supplemental essays sort of are the same. So you want to make sure that you are using different areas of your application to highlight different pieces of who you are and why you're ready for medical school. So.
Thank you, Chris. I think a good example of that is actually we ask all of our applicants to do a preliminary portfolio where they repeat a lot of the questions that are on both primaries and secondaries. And we see we ask about strengths, we ask about competencies, and we see similar things coming through in their motivational ones. And I think that's fine right now, but that's a good statement to think about, like when you're actually constructing your full narrative for their applications, making sure they're not repeating the same story over and over. Absolutely. Excuse me. One of the other things we see a lot of is students who have had time abroad, who have done international trips or service trips or things like that. And this strikes me as something that there's a delicate balance about writing about as well. Do either of you have any thoughts in terms of, how to write about impactful international or global service trips or things like that, and how those can be done well versus kind of leaning on the ways that might not be done well?
So again, I think for a lot of this, it goes back to reflection and how you're writing about what you've done, right? You could have a service trip that for all intents and purposes, you only had minimal amounts of medical exposure on, but it could have been the most meaningful medical exposure that you've had, right? And being able to talk about that in a way that sort of highlights the depth of whatever you experienced is really important. And again, that goes, I think for us, goes back to, instead of talking about things in this generalist way, is getting down into some of those deeper pieces of this singular experience had this impact on me. So I think for us, that would be the lens that we would look through, is try to like, you know, pull that back and say, okay, what was that specific experience as opposed to the whole trip? Because we know that a lot of service trips are not solely focused on what people want them to be focused on or what they write about.
So again, endorse what Chris says, but here's one way I've seen it done and done very well. Someone goes to, Peru. It seems to be one of those popular ones too, Spain, number of places. But what the applicant has done is then compare the experience in that international country to the experience here. And so they're doing a sort of comparison to the healthcare system in that country and here. And they do a nice, comparison of that. And then there's some reflection in terms of how that has informed, their decisions in terms of how they will practice in the future. So that certainly I think is a good way to approach those international, health experiences. When I advise students, I said, yes, you have to be careful in terms of how you present it, but at the same time, I don't want you to sell yourself short. So if you had this amazing experience in Peru, even though millions of people have gone to the same place, if you had an amazing experience, you don't want to hide that. You want to make sure you highlight that in your in your application. All right. So again, I think a good way of doing that is to look at the system, the healthcare system in the US and the healthcare system in those other countries in which you had the experience, and do some comparison and some reflection on it, and you'll be fine. Okay.
I think one other area that we see is people using the stories of others that they meet when they're in those other countries to sort of tell that piece of the story of like, okay, I went here and I worked with this family and this family experienced this and this and this, and here's how that changed me or something. So I think there's a lot of different ways you can use those experiences from different places that either medical mission trips or other types of service trips that can really not only show that you're preparing yourself for medical school, but it also shows a lot of those personal characteristics about who you are and how you might fit within the different communities that medical schools are looking at.
Thank you both. We did have a question in the chat from Shannon, who's asking for an example of something that's, someone's path into medicine that is memorable or not cliche. And so I think focusing on the positive side of things, what have been some of the most memorable things you've heard people talk about that have stood out in your time reading applications?
Oh, a number of things. And when I look at the question, and it's not cliche at all, again, your experience is your experience. And if it's similar to what thousands of others have done, that's your experience. And again, don't run away from it. It's a matter of how you present it to us, okay? I want to get that clear. So there's going to be a lot of people who have the similar experiences, but it's a matter of how you present it to us. Some of the most memorable, what I can say, I've seen individuals who have gone out and formed a nonprofit organization in terms of helping individuals in terms of healthcare and access to healthcare. That's some of the things. And these are individuals who, went to the undergraduate, became very, very busy during the undergraduate years, and then they didn't go from undergraduate to medical school right away, but they took a year or two and they did some phenomenal things. All right. And as I said, one I remember is forming this nonprofit in which they had major impact in a community in terms of bringing access to healthcare to that community. So that's one thing that I can remember off the top of my head. There is something that's maybe it's becoming a cliche now, but there's Teach for America, and I've seen a lot of applicants who have done Teach for America. But in Teach for America, you're placed in these communities, and you can actually do wonderful things in them. And so I've seen some individuals who have really explained and present to us a lot of the wonderful things that they have been doing in the community in which they're teaching. So that's that's another area that I've seen. But as I said, more and more now, I've seen more and more Teach for America applicants. So it may be becoming a little cliche. But again, I want to stress that, if that's your experience, that's your experience. It's a matter of how you present it to us, and in terms of making sure that there is that reflective piece so that we can really see, hey, this definitely was an impactful experience to this individual. Okay? So again, don't shy away from stuff that you may think is cliche. It's a matter of how you present it to us. Okay? Yes, Chris.
I think a couple of pieces that have stuck out for me and over the years during some reading. We focus a lot on volunteering and service here at UNE. And so there's been a couple of instances where people have been used some of the stories that they worked with healthcare for the homeless, like down in Boston or New York City. And those were very powerful, impactful stories because they, I think, often took one singular situation or a singular person that they were working with and sort of illuminated some of that. So those stick out. Another one that really sticks out, and this is kind of strange, someone had, this is many years ago now, someone had some issues in their past dealing with, I think, some drug stuff and the law. And so they were very, very upfront in their essay about that and how that changed them and where they were today. And that sticks out to me because it's not often that you see that, where someone is so upfront with how they screwed up and how things did not work out and then where they're at today. So that can also work if you do it right. But you have to, I think, be the right person and have the right experiences to really make that one work. And then I think the other stuff, we've had some people that have gone through the Peace Corps, and those have been some really enlightening and interesting stories. The other one that I think about is like AmeriCorps Vista, where people are going into different communities, often sort of the lower income or underserved communities, and working either in education systems or healthcare systems. And a lot of times their stories are very illuminating as well. So I think the one thing that all of that goes back to is the service piece for us. And those are the ones that tend to be the ones that stick out, probably because that's what we're looking for quite a bit.
Awesome. I think that's really helpful in terms of just being genuine, telling your own story and really telling the why, and the being reflective piece is so important. And the piece that it may seem cliche on the surface, but if you can tell it well, it can be really impactful, is really important. So we're nearing the end of our time, but before we turn it over for any other questions from the audience, I actually wanted to turn to all of our faces on this screen, if you will, and actually ask Krista, Keith, Christina, anybody, do you have any 1 to 2 pieces of final advice that you would share? Because I know that Krista and Keith in their work through our office have seen many personal statements, worked with many students. So any advice that any of the faces I see on this call might be wanting to share from their experience?
I'll jump in. I think part of it is also doing the research of to where you want to apply to kind of utilize what the mission statement of those schools are. So like do the research, go to the virtual events that are hosted, see if that's a connection and a fit for you. And then that can help you kind of build up your personal statement to add in mission statement words, what they're focused on, and then you can hopefully look back at your experiences to see what fits into that.
Go ahead, Krista.
Thank you. When reading statements, I typically look for some kind of mention of patient-centered care, the focus really on serving the patient, just to see what the applicant's real motivation for going into medicine is. You know, if they have a really altruistic mindset versus this is something kind of self-serving because I just want the praise for it. That's just my personal, what I always tend to look for.
This is Keith. I'll just add a few comments that I sort of jotted down. Appreciate all the contributions of everybody. Personal statement, it's got to be a coherent message. It's got to respond to the prompt. You know, most people speak to their motivations that are triggered by specific people, by specific experiences and challenges faced. Most include a statement about passion for science and service. Statement should be true to who you are. It is your opportunity to sort of present a bit of your personality and character and moral compass as part of your mission in making that statement to schools. You do have to select a few experiences to talk about. When you first start to do this, you sit down and you're writing a novel about your entire life. So you do have to be a bit selective. And, you know, they need to be some good sort of telling experiences to the listener. You know, the way I sort of approach this is things to avoid. For many years working at the medical school, I read about 3,000 of these for close to 35 years a year. And I think I've seen virtually every possible combination of potential statements, anything from purposely leaving the page blank to make or to tell a message of some kind. So I wouldn't suggest that you do that. But I've seen cartoons, I've seen songs, I've seen, you know, major figures in medicine's history in a dialogue about something or other. So I mean, you can do quite a lot of very different and creative things, but just remember, you know, what your audience is, who you're talking to, and you just don't want to get sort of too far off the mark. So a personal statement is not a resume review. So you don't want to do that. Don't make it too flowery. Often people say, well, this is how I'm going to really, you know, show people my vocabulary, show people, you know, how erudite I am. You can sometimes overdo it and you just lose the people you're talking with and the way that you're choosing to present your message. You don't want to have it disjointed in any way. It really has to, as was expressed, have a nice flow and sort of all the threads tied together. As I say, you can be creative, but you know, again, just kind of keep in mind the audience that you're addressing. Sometimes in, you know, pushing the creative side of things, you can sort of lose some of your audience. I think you want to be confident. You also want to be humble. Tell it in the active voice. It's got to be genuine. It's got to be sincere. You want to avoid sort of oversharing. You know, some of these get really, very emotional. And again, sometimes you sort of remember the audience you're talking to, and sometimes you can lose the audience. Another potential mistake is to spend a lot of time sort of talking about what come across as excuses, you know, for errors made. So it's fine to address that, but you want to keep it very short and to the point and make sure you end on positives rather than to be explaining away some negatives. So you want to be careful about talking about, you know, hardships and how much time you dedicate in the essay to that. You know, another thing that sort of whenever I've done workshops in the past related to personal statements, I usually start with prompts because, you know, most people are left with a blank. I mean, they sit down and, you know, they just don't know where to start. They don't know what to talk about. So it's a good idea just to ask yourself some prompts. What have been the 3 most influential experiences in your life and why? Who have been the most important mentors in your life and why? And once you get to that point where you're really making some specific statements about that, I think it becomes much clearer to you how you want to present yourself and what you want to say. So just some comments from some.
Erin, can I add one thing real quick?
So wonderful, Keith.
I just wanted to add that people, just the students, believe in yourself. You know, you've got this. I know we threw out all sorts of do's and don'ts and strategies and be sincere, and we mean everything we said. You made the decision to go to med school for a reason. Try not to doubt yourself. Focus on your future. Believe in who you are, and that will come through in your essays and your other application material.
Thank you, Beth. I think that's a great note to go ahead, Granville. I see you unmuting. So feel.
Right. Yeah. One thing to pick up on what Keith said. Yeah, we've seen lots of things in terms of too much information. You have to be very careful about that. I mean, I can give example. For example, sexual assault. That's something is very, very emotional, and again, not that I want you to hide it, but it has to be sort of reflective in terms of the impact that it's had on you in terms of your decision to become a physician. All right. So again, you have to be very careful. The other part that I want to pick up what Keith mentioned about some of the negative things and not making excuses. And again, I'm giving you specific examples. Don't bash the organic chemistry professor. All right, because it might be an organic chemistry professor who is reading that personal statement. All right, evidence, prime evidence. So again, I'm using that as an example. You have to be very careful in terms of, yes, your experience in the organic chemistry course may have had some impact on you, but you have to do some reflection on it and not necessarily have it as an excuse and say, well, the organic chemistry professor was really bad. All right, you have to think about, hey, maybe, you weren't in tune in terms of how to study organic chemistry, and then you went to the professor, and then, that helped you. And then you have to tie it in. How is that important in terms of your impact, your influence, or your decision to become a physician? All right. So again, everything has to be within context. Okay. All right. Sorry. We have lots more we can talk about, but.
Thank you to everybody for sharing their pieces of advice, and Dr. Sand for sharing all of his years and years of advice from his work at UConn Med as well. We are reaching the end of our time, but I did want to invite any of the students or applicants who are still on to ask any additional questions. You can feel free to unmute or come on screen or put them in the chat. And I also wanted to mention Christina is, I believe, happy to stay for a minute and make any connections for anyone who has questions about UNE as well. But I did want to just thank all of our panelists for their time today, for giving part of your Friday afternoon to our students. We do appreciate it so much, being part of our supportive community for our UConn applicants.
Thank you for having us.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Hi.
Go ahead.
I just have one really quick question. I was in class, I missed like the beginning part. I know the Center for Career Development was doing a presentation. I don't know if you mentioned or not because I probably missed it, but how do you make or like set up an appointment to talk about like the personal statement? Because I think I missed that part.
Excellent question, and I'm happy to reinforce that. So you just go to the career website and go to Handshake, and at the top you will see schedule an appointment, and then you'll schedule a 30-minute appointment with someone like myself, and you can meet with us as many times as you like for as many different versions and drafts and programs as you need.
Perfect, thank you.
Shannon has their hand up.
Hi, my name's Shannon. I'm just wondering a little bit about, I know we talked a lot about personal statements today due to the fact that this was the, the meeting for it. I was wondering how important are numbers like statistics like GPA, MCAT, hours, clinical volunteering, non-clinical volunteering. Like, is it, I understand that medical schools are becoming more holistic in their admissions, but how impactful is a number? Like, will you get screened out even if you have, 1,000 hours in research, but your MCAT's only a 500. Is that a thing still?
Okay, I can go first. Yeah, all of it is still very important. I think that's the easiest, simplest answer. All of it is still very important. So if you're talking about 1,000 hours of research, use the example, and 500 or 502 MCAT. If someone has fewer hours of research and a 528 on the MCAT, for example, and then everything else, is lined up better. For example, you mentioned research, but I'm going to talk about service, volunteering, that service. I'm going to talk about the clinical exposure, for example. All right. So if they have all those and they're better, yes, they'll probably be at a more competitive advantage over you who has a smaller MCAT. All right. So when I advise students, I tell them, yes, all schools, everyone is now saying, hey, we're doing holistic, review, and that may be true, but the individual component is still very important. All right. So you still have to have a competitive MCAT score, competitive GPA, and all the other stuff that we're looking for, your service hours and your exposure to the profession. Okay.
I would say that's true for UNE as well. The one thing that I will put out there is that number of hours can be a bit deceptive. We don't publish the number of hours that we want students to have for any medical exposure or any volunteering or service opportunity. And part of the reason is you could go get 1,000 hours volunteering in a hospital doing something that you're getting medical exposure. But there's someone else who has 400 hours, doing hospice work, that the depth of the hospice work is much deeper than your volunteering at the hospital. And so some of it has to do with what you're doing in each of those circumstances as well. So yes, hours is important. Having substantial exposure to medicine, volunteering, all of that stuff, very important. But what you do is also very important. It's not just about going to do something to get those hours to say you've done it. You want to make sure you feel connected to whatever you're doing, that there's some passion behind it. So yes, the numbers are important, but some of this other stuff is equally as important.
Thank you. I was just wondering because I understand that intent is more important, like passion is more important than checking off a box for the admissions. Thank you.
Krista, do you have anything to add before we close out?
I think Maria is raising her hand.
Okay, Maria, go ahead.
Hi, sorry. I just had a quick question. I really enjoyed the presentation today, and I don't want to keep you guys for too long. But and I learned a lot. But I was just wondering if you guys have any advice, because I have a lot of ideas of what I want to write about my personal statement. I just feel like it's kind of hard for me to narrow it down. So I was just wondering what you guys would recommend, kind of trying to get started and weeding out some less, I guess, important or organized ideas.
Maria, we see a lot of students at the Career Center like that, and I would say, honestly, at the beginning, just write everything. I'd rather you write it all out, and then you'll work with someone like myself and we'll whittle through and say, let's talk about your motivations for including it again. Is this more for you to feel the need to express it, or is it more truly this will help the admissions committee? And I think once we're able to parse that out of it, it'll be easier. I know, again, when I write, I sometimes have to step away. So I would say it's better to write it all out and then work with someone and you'll start to see patterns. But it's just, just right away. WRITE space away and just let it all out, and then don't worry about your grammar and punctuation, your flow at that point either, unless someone like me, I have to get it right as I type because it irritates the heck out of me. But I know that's not everyone. So if you don't have that as an obstacle, just write, and then you can worry about the grammar and stuff a little bit later.
And the more that you write, the more illuminated it's going to become in terms of the direction that you're going to want to go. You're going to find that there's a natural sort of path that you're going to take in terms of once you start writing, you're going to go where you need to go. as opposed to all the other stuff is going to fall away. So having studied English, I would say that is probably one of the most important things, is just start writing, and it will start to come. And honestly, like, even if you have the writer's block, write about something that is totally not part of like the chair, write about, you know, describe something just to like get some words going. That can also be helpful. So, and just a good exercise to like being able to learn to use words to describe things in a different way. But I would say certainly just writing is probably one of the best pieces of advice in terms of getting started.
Okay, I just want to add something here. I don't know what year all the students are, but when I give presentation and I talk about in preparation for your personal statement, I'm one who still advocate the use of a journal. So as you're going along and getting, you know, those experiences, you should be writing something along, because, you know, then that would help you in terms of the reflective part. All right. So I tell students, starting from your freshman year, all right, to start writing down about all the experiences that you have as you go along. You're just not thinking about grammar or anything. You're just writing about the experience that you've had. All right. And then over the years, you collect these things and you go back and look at them. All right. So when you're writing your personal statement now, you can look at them. And as Chris and as someone else was saying, then as you start putting things together, things are going to fall away, because in your mind, you're making some determination anyway. All right. So that's one thing I usually suggest to students, you know, starting in your freshman year, start writing about the experiences that you're having. All right. And then when it comes to getting the personal statement, it should make it a lot easier. All right. But again, I endorse what you're saying. If you're now ready to write a personal statement and you haven't had a journal, just write everything down. Just put everything down and then work from there. Okay. And that works as well. Okay.
So I want to be cognizant of everybody's time, recognize we have gone over a little bit, but I know that some folks do want to stay around and continue the conversation. So I think Krista had to jump out and I will need to leave as well, but I have assigned Christina as a co-host, so we should be able to continue this meeting if anybody wants to stay around and talk to her or ask any additional questions. But also just want to thank Granville, Chris, Beth, Christina, and Keith, everybody for their time today. And if students or applicants do have any questions for follow-up, feel free to send us an email to our pre-med and dental inbox at any point, or you can schedule a meeting with any of our advisors. So thank you everybody for joining us today. We're so grateful.